adjustment, a 5-year budget projection, and what's next in the calendar. Budget development, again, just quickly what we've done at the board meetings, and the budget development really started back in the summer when you were developing the district goals and setting goal 4, looking at a 2% increase. Then in September, there was actually on the agenda a discussion item to develop what requests there were for budget analyses. That then fed into the actual process beginning in November, where we went over the baseline data for the budget development. December looked at the budget analyses that had been requested by the board back in September. In January, we received the enrollment projections, looked at the comparative spending, historical trends, and revenue assumptions. In February at the board meeting, the discussion was about the budget considerations and requests that we had received, discussed at that point the tax cap adjustments and banked cap, and looked at what the estimated tax impact may be. And then starting in March, that's where we're having these workshops and the forums, and on Monday, need to approve for county submittal for review. The budget materials that are available, and everything but this evening's documents are already up on the website. The others will be put on after this evening. The budget presentations from February 2nd, from February 23rd, and from March 4th. Baseline budget data is there, including the original budget development calendar is attached to the budget data, so you can see all of the meetings that we had scheduled. Budget analyses from December 15th. And then the proposed budget, the side-by-side view, the comparative view, staffing report, and new added this evening is the multi-year projections, which is available in the back and will be put on the website this evening. The one report that we've had questions about that is not on there is what we call the cost center view. That's a very detailed report. It basically takes the same information that's already out there and shows it in a different format. Unfortunately, because some of the final decisions about the budget were made just earlier this week, and it is an extremely tedious document to put together, it's not available for this evening. We're hoping to have it for Monday. But it is just a reflection of all the information that's on the other reports, just in a different format. Tax levy cap adjustments and banked cap. We spoke about the fact that the request that we're putting in front of you for the proposal includes using $330,000 of an enrollment adjustment. The total enrollment adjustment we received for this year's budget, and this is calculated by the state, it's given to us as part of the budget software, was $588,254. Again, of that amount, we have in the proposed budget $330,000 of that adjustment. That leaves a total of $258,254 that will be considered banked cap going forward. And again, banked cap does not mean money we have in the bank. It's the taxing authority that we can use. And you can see on the chart, the far right column, as we go to build the 2016-17 budget, what amount would be available as banked cap or taxing authority going into that, which is $1,637,604. There's a full $2,144,437 that is available for us to use this year that we're not taking into account. So that's being left on the table for any better term of using. The revenue that we're proposing, and some of this is just very slightly different from last week, I think by about $600, was just some rounding as we were continuing to build the budget going into the software. So a very, very slight difference. But looking at a local tax levy of $109,024,377, state aid, as we reported last week, came in flat compared to last year. We do have a request from Capital Reserve to move money to do a capital outlay projects, 2 projects next year. One, some bathroom restoration at Clinton School, and the other being electrical upgrades at Jefferson School. The project for the electrical upgrades at Jefferson School is actually taking advantage of ROD grants, regular operating district funds from the state. The amount that we would put in, the local share, is 60% of the project, and the state would be giving us 40% of the funds to help complete that project. Fund balance, the $2,471,003 comes out of the audit. That's an amount that we must use to offset taxes for next year, so it comes in as a revenue. Tuition, we're estimating for the first year of opening up the Montrose Early Learning Center, $200,000 in tuition payments. Miscellaneous going up a bit from last year, mainly because we have been seeing some increases in miscellaneous. That's some tuition funds that we get. There's some interest, not very much, that we get from there. A couple of miscellaneous expenditures, but as we've been discussing, there's been the suggestion that we charge for some of the summer school classes, a couple of other initiatives in order to bring in some money to offset some of our costs. So with that in mind, we did do a little bit of a bump there for the miscellaneous. Debt service, you can see, is actually lower than it was last year. It's partially the cycle of where we are in the debt service, but it's also a factor, and this more will come in when we get to a later slide, the revenue part of it. Debt service aid actually increased this year, so that didn't affect the debt service total, but you'll see it does impact the amount that the district needs to pay out. State and federal aid, you see an increase there. That's partially budgeting an increase in extraordinary aid. We have been seeing higher numbers than we've seen in the past, or numbers that we could count on, figuring that we're going to have an increase. Last year we received an extraordinary aid about $1.8 million, and I'm budgeting $1 million. Substantially lower, but we can't count on that money. We don't know how much money we're going to get till the end of the year, even though it must be budgeted for the current school year. The applications don't take place until the spring, so there's so many factors that go into it, plus the cash flow. We don't get the payment till after the school year is over. So we're conservative in terms of what we budget on that line. The other increase there on state and federal aid is a Perkins grant, a vocational grant that we get from the federal government. We've been getting that for a few years as well. It shows up in the current year and in last year as part of the adjusted budget. This year we're putting it up front and assuming that we will get those funds. Total revenue, $123,484,280. Considerations that went into building the budget, certainly the enrollment increases that we've been talking about, middle school schedules, and what adjustments are there, how it will impact things, STEM initiatives that are going on across the district, professional development, Montrose Early Learning Center, the opening of that had costs associated with it. Specifically had talked about Seth Boyden and the enrollments there and taking that into account as we built the budget. The increase in technology we talked about when we did the budget analyses, just with all of the increases we have between security services, the extra Chromebooks, just more technology across the district. We need more support with that, so there is an increase in the support for the technology. Middle State's accreditation process, there's some funds in there for both completing the process as well as taking into account that there might start to be some changes at the high school towards the end of next year based on the accreditation process. Educational Equity Consultant, the OCR agreement, that's built into the budget for next year, the costs associated with that. Opening new classrooms, along with the change in the schedule at the middle schools, they're adding 2 teams at the middle schools, 1 at each of them for the 7th grade, going to 3 teams at each middle school. So there'll be the opening of those new classrooms, costs associated with that, as well as the staffing associated with that. And increased out-of-district placements and increased transportation. We just have seen numbers started to increase this year. That's part of what is shown in the adjusted budget. And so we took that into account as we built next year's budget. We are doing an analysis to figure out why those numbers went up this year, if there was some driving force, if it was just a matter that we had more numbers, or if there's something else taking place, and already working to try to reduce some of those costs. In fact, I had one phone call today that will help us reduce transportation by one route, just with pairing with another district. So we're working to bring that cost down already for this year, which will then help us for next year as well. Analyzing every line to identify reductions. With all of the increases that we took into consideration, we had to make some adjustments on the other side in order to balance the budget. And so we did take into account the enrollment changes, realizing that as numbers were going up at one level, they were going down at other levels. So there is a decrease anticipated at the elementary for next year. Employment contributions, been a lot of discussion about health care. With the employee contributions going into the health care, we do actually have a budget for less cost for health benefits for next year than we do for this year. We also have the task force that is finalizing their report for looking at different types of health care options that are out there. And from their recommendation, we will continue to pursue different types of insurance that might be available to the district, trying to find some way to reel in those costs that keep increasing at a faster rate than the 2%. Reduction of summer programs, really did an analysis looking at the summer programs that have been offered in the past year or so, looking at which ones have been effective, which ones haven't, which ones have high enrollments, which ones don't have enrollments, and structuring that a little bit differently to be able to reduce some of this programming. Central office reorganization, with retirements taking place at central office, we are proposing that we have a reduction of one staff member. It currently shows up on the staffing chart as the reduction of an assistant superintendent. We're not necessarily recommending that to be a position that's eliminated. It's just that we identified that since we have an assistant superintendent who happens to be retiring. So that is in there as a placeholder, but we're waiting to make a full recommendation. If the board, in fact, finds a candidate for a superintendent, we feel that that person should be involved in how the central office is reorganized. Middle school behavioral services, this was a program that was serviced through an outside company at the middle school and had been budgeted to do so this year. In fact, we had realized that we had a staff member who had the skills, could run a very effective, efficient program. People have been very happy with the program, with using one of our own staff members. So we did take that into account going forward. We no longer were budgeting to use an outside company, but to use the internal staffing that we put into place for this year. And restructuring of administrative and coaching support. We are making a recommendation, still being finalized and formulated, so I don't have all the details for you, and I believe Mr. Memoli will speak to it a little bit after I finish my presentation, but we are looking at doing some restructuring. The adjustments that we talked about last week in terms of staffing has really been at Montrose School for the opening of the Early Learning Center, as well as the additional staff I talked about at the middle schools. For Montrose, a total increase of 5 FTEs are built into the budget for a director, a nurse, a secretary, and 2 FTEs for teachers for the pre-K. In fact, the original proposal talked about having 4 FTEs, but we will only add the FTEs as we get the enrollment, so we should be getting tuition to help offset any additional FTEs that might need to be added. The additional teams at the middle schools and reorganization there calls for 2 additional classroom teachers. As I said, they're adding 2 teams, but with reorganization of existing staff, we only need to add an additional 2 FTEs. In addition to that, because of the structure of the schedule, we will need an additional 1.6 FTEs in physical education, a 0.8 at each of the buildings, for a total addition compared to the current adjusted budget of 8.6 FTEs. On the other hand, we're looking at a reduction for a net total of 3.4. This is a change from last week. With the reorganization that we're talking about, and again, Mr. Memoli will talk a little bit more about it, but one of the things we're looking at is having the 6th through 8th supervisors work only at the high school, the supervisors 9 through 12, and with that picking up a class. With them being able to pick up a class, we were able to make some adjustments within the budget, and hearing what the board discussed last week and the feedback we received, we added back in the reading specialist position, so that is not being cut from the budget. I'm sorry, the reading intervention, yes, reading intervention position. So last week we had reported we were looking to reduce by 13. We're only looking to reduce by 12. That position being a guidance counselor. This is at the high school level, somebody who's retiring. We will not refill that position. 2 secretaries. Again, we're adding 1 secretary at Montrose, so the net is that we're reducing 1 secretary. This is also a planned retirement coming out of the central office building. Reduce the gifted and talented